So first thing I kind of want to talk about is tungsten lighting, and it's not commonly used anymore, but it used to be the most common form of lighting before flash became prominent. I've got a couple of different tungsten lights here. This little guy is actually a video light, runs off a cigarette lighter adapter, so you could run it off a battery on location. So a lot of wedding portrait guys used to use this as their little sort of run and gun light, especially at weddings. They used to just have an assistant with the battery, and they'd run around, and this would give that nice little spot of light on the couple, or as a backlight during the dance or things like that. So it's kind of focusable from a wide and a spot setting. But this wasn't extremely bright, it was 100 watts. This guy here is a 500 watt, and you can actually get a 1000 watt bulb to put in there as well, so that's extremely bright. Big downside of these is that they get extremely hot, being tungsten. So I don't know how many times I've burnt myself on this guy over the years, because I normally would have a barn doors mounted on the front to control the light. And I was always forgetting to get a towel or something and to shift the barn doors, and I'd end up burning my fingers. So straight out, these lights are what we call quite hard light, so you get a very, very strong shadow. So it was difficult to soften the light, because if you used the standard kind of softbox, you'd melt it. So you had to use heat resistant fabric and things like that. So it was a little bit difficult to do. But if you look at the portraits from like the 1930s, 1940s, those Hollywood sort of portraits, they were all kind of shot with these tungsten kind of lights. And of course, you can shoot video with these as well, and they were commonly used on film sets. The other thing is that because they're very, very warm, just like a household tungsten bulb, you have to use your white balance either on auto or set to a tungsten white balance, so you get a clean look. Otherwise it's really, really orange. So they're relatively inexpensive for what they are. So our next option is fluorescent lighting. And this was kind of that in-between stage between tungsten and LED. Fluorescent became fairly popular because it was daylight balanced, so you didn't have any issues with mixing with normal daylight color temperature. And they were available in a few different styles. So we had the tube style in a bank like this, and they were usually either in 2 or 4 tubes. They came with these little barn doors which helped you control the light. But the only way you could really soften them was by, putting a little diffusion material across the front. And that was a bit cumbersome and didn't work too well. And of course, whenever you put something in front of the light, you're reducing the amount of light that's coming through as well. So you'd end up cutting down the amount of light by 1 to 2 stops, and they're not particularly bright to begin with. So you're starting to shoot at higher ISOs. So this guy here is the ring light, and that's what I used to create those shots that you see, that first shot and that one that's on the screen now. So they're designed to be used fairly close to the subject as a portrait, and you're just shooting through the hole in the middle. Telltale sign is the round highlight, like a donut in the eyes. The third type of fluorescent, which I don't actually have here at the moment, I'll just go back a slide. That one on the right, which is the compact fluorescent tubes. So, pretty similar to what you find in the household. But they're available in fittings, which you can put up to 4 of them in the one fitting, and then put a softbox over the top and put it on a normal light stand. So you can buy kits of those, a couple of heads, stands and the softboxes for a couple $100 on eBay. So a lot of people use them for still life product type photography. They're doing products for websites and things like that and they just want a nice, clean, soft light because they aren't particularly bright. So if you're using it on a tripod, you can slow your shutter speed down and it doesn't really matter, but not as practical for general sort of portrait photography. So again, pretty good for shooting video and stills at the same time, and very inexpensive when you can buy those kits on eBay. They're not particularly great quality, but they do a good job for what they are. I guess the common theme across all the constant lighting is, what you see is what you get. So when you're looking at the light falling on your subject, you know exactly kind of how it's going to come out in your image. So that brings us up to LED. And LED has really become quite popular in the last couple of years. And there's a couple of different types of LED. We've got, this is your focusable Fresnel. And this is modeled on the type of light that they used to use as a tungsten light in those 1930s and 40s, or a film light. And it's got a little knob on the back which can actually focus. Oh, you can see that moving. That yellow thing you can see in the middle there is the actual LED chip. And so by moving that back and forth, change the distance between the LED chip and the front panel, you can change whether it's spot or wide. And then the barn doors, obviously, to cut the light back. So these are available in quite a number of different power settings. This is a 2000 watt, so it's really, really bright. They've also got a 650 and a 1000 as well. The other most common type is the panels, and these are made up of individual LEDs. So they come in, sizes like that, or even just like tiny little guys like these. So the price for LED panels varies considerably. So that's one that's actually not particularly bright. It's bright when you're looking straight into it, but it doesn't really output a huge amount of light. If we look at this guy here, just aim that away from you a little bit. So that's currently on 10%, and that's at 100%. So these output quite a large amount of light. But the only way to really soften those is to put just a small softbox on the front, or just a big sheet of diffusion, which again cuts down the amount of light that's available. One of the other great things about a lot of these LEDs is that they're bicolor or dual color, meaning that you can change the color temperature from tungsten, 3200 degrees Kelvin, anywhere in between up to 5600 degrees Kelvin, which is sort of your daylight balance. So they're really good for, balancing between household bulbs, if you sort of want to use a practical light, which is the term that they use in filmmaking. So that means, say a lamp is in the background of the shot. If it appears in the image, it's a practical light. So if you're trying to light a subject with a lamp in the background, you can dial in the color temperature on these and balance them up. And the other one, which is becoming really, really popular now, is these, what they call chip on board. And basically the Fresnels are a chip on board as well. That yellow thing is the LED chip. Basically what that is thousands of minute little LEDs all mashed in together to create kind of one big light source. So unlike these guys, which are rather big LEDs, and you can see them individually there, these have got tiny minute ones all pushed in there. And this is pretty bright. And the great thing about these is that they use a pretty standard fitting, so you can put any kind of modifier you like on there, softboxes, reflectors with grids and snoots and all that sort of stuff. So this particular brand, Aperture, they make these lights with the Bowens type of fitting, but because LED is not a hot source, you can easily use any light shaper and don't have to worry about, you know, the heat sort of affecting it or melting it or something. So that light there that's lighting me at the moment is one of those, and you can see it's got the big softbox on it. So it's possible to achieve very, very similar results from LED lights like these, the same as, you know, a flash, using the same type of accessories. So the advantage of that is you are getting exactly what you can see. They're really good for balancing with other constant light sources. So you can just vary the output. Like that example shot there with the fairy lights in the background. That was shot with that light there with the big softbox lighting the face of the model. And then one of these set to tungsten, with it's lighting up the hair, so you can see that warmth coming through the hair. And then the background is just fairy lights hanging on the wall. So it's much more difficult to balance that with flash because the output of the fairy lights is very low. So you have to increase your ISO and shoot a wide open lens, wide open aperture. And sometimes a lot of flashes aren't able to be turned down low enough to balance that out. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Another advantage is that there are sort of battery options. You know, this is used as just a standard Sony video type battery, so you can use that anywhere. And this type of thing has kind of replaced this tungsten light in terms of portability and, you know, using them just as a little kicker light, backlight, that sort of thing on weddings and portraits on location. And as I mentioned, you can get them a lot of the time daylight and tungsten balanced. Some of the disadvantages of LED though is that they are, while they appear bright to our eyes, they don't output a lot in comparison to a flash. We kind of see it as really, really bright because it's constant light. When we see a flash, it happens for an absolute short instant, and we don't notice particularly how bright it is unless it's, you know, right in front of our face. But with the LED lights, when they're set up really, really bright and you're up close to it, looking straight into it, it can be a bit hurtful on the eyes. So higher ISOs and quite a wide open apertures are what's required to get a decent kind of shot, a decent shutter speed, especially if you're hand holding. The other thing is that because of that output restriction, you can't really use them as a light to overpower the sun outside. So with flash, you can get that bright enough that you can overpower the sun, assuming that it's powerful enough. But with LED, that's just not quite practical at this stage. And some of the battery options can be very, very expensive. So the battery option to run this guy, you know, talking $1,000 with a charger. So it's not the same as, you know, $100 that you can get on the smaller LEDs. So from a power to price point of view, they are quite expensive compared to flash. And unless you're sort of using that aperture style, which uses that common fitting, it can be quite difficult to get accessories, and that can be quite limited. As I mentioned with the panel, yeah, it's a bit limited in what you can do and how you can shape the light with those.